On the line is Dave Weigel. He's a reporter at the Washington Post. You might have heard of it. And he writes a fantastic newsletter called The Trailer. Dave, welcome to the show.
It's good to be here. Thank you.
I am so glad to have you on because I think that you are one of the best political journalists in the business. And I think that is because you seem to spend as little time in Washington as humanly possible. So I believe you're just back from Iowa, right?
Yeah, I got back yesterday afternoon after 4 of 5 events Warren was holding. I had colleagues who were there for the entire trip.
Solid.
I got the gist, although it was interesting to hear her work out the message. And then, this early stage of the campaign, maybe you get hives when you think about it. But for me, it's the time when there's no Secret Service.
Yeah.
You're kind of catching up with staff right after the events and seeing how they think it went. They're kind of things are getting worked around. It's like what I imagine like a table reading is for a script. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah, this is like the magical part of a campaign where you actually have access and people are. And also this time, usually when the presidential cycle happens, people are like, oh my God, already? And this time people just seem pumped.
Oh, absolutely. So Warren's venues for this were all overflowing. As you know, the nightmare is we book 1,000 seats and 950 people show up, and the camera is trained on the 50 empty seats, right?
Yep.
Because they're always at the front because people are polite and don't ask questions. And she filled the event. She talked to around 3,000 people showed up at these events, and she did some scrums with the media after almost everything. She did also, this was important, it doesn't sound important, it sounds like horse race nonsense journalism, but she made sure to take photos and sign books with everyone who wanted to after the events. They baked in time for her to hang around. Having covered lots of campaigns at this point, not everyone does that.
No.
And this was a reason I thought Bernie Sanders ended up losing Iowa. Should it matter? That's a very good question. But very early in this campaign, or I just want to be a campaign so we can stop being exploratory because this is it's such a time-wasting word. This early in the campaign, no, they've got exactly what they wanted, and it's not as big as the Obama launch in Iowa. I'm not just saying that to pander to you, but on the scale of people making their first visits, it was pretty big.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. That was my baby. I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
So you're with Elizabeth Warren. Interesting to me. I thought it was interesting that she started her kickoff in Western Iowa, which is traditionally more Republican. It's generally less important for Democrats in the caucuses because of the way the delegate math works. Most of your delegates are going to come from Des Moines and then the eastern part of the state. Do you know why they did that, and how do you think her message was received generally in those visits?
Well, it's not just that, and again, I want to keep saying, as you know. All right, let's assume both of us here don't need to Iowa-splain to each other.
Right.
But yeah, also if you're in Western Iowa, half your crowds are going to be from Nebraska or from South Dakota, and they can vote at some point. But if you're a South Dakotan, you're voting like 6 months after Iowa does. So, it was. It was interesting, and the sense I got, they don't like to talk shop. You can get a feel from talking to the campaign staff. Any Democrat could go to Davenport or Des Moines and get a big crowd. Warren got a big crowd in Council Bluffs. She got a big crowd in Sioux City. These are places that, forget Hillary losing them. They just don't go Democratic.
They're Steve King's district.
She got a ton of. She I think wanted to demonstrate that. For all the coverage about how she's the lefty, Bernie, progressive, move on candidate, that this message is interesting to people who do not fit that stereotype. These are not places that even went very strong for Bernie in 2016. So I think that came off. There were Republicans in some of these crowds. Not a lot. I mean, but you did not see the kind of hard-nosed cynicism, people showing up and turning away because she didn't answer their, how do we close off the border with laser beams questions. But it was a pretty moderate crowd. It wasn't just lefties who showed up. I mean, frankly, just a lot of guys with beards and trucker hats and Teamsters who did not love Hillary Clinton when I talked to them. Didn't have a ton of animus, but were not happy to vote in that election and showed up for her. So I think that message got across. And of course, she finished in Des Moines and Ankeny.
Right.
But it was notable that she did her first 3 stops in places the Democrats don't tend to win.
Yeah, Ankeny being a northern suburb of Des Moines.
Ankeny, yeah.
So
the joke during 2016 was that Marco Rubio was the mayor of Ankeny because he would just come to Des Moines, go to the suburbs, and then go back home for a fundraiser.
He's the mayor of his own sad little existence now. So I watched a couple of Warren's events on YouTube because I I lead a rich and fulfilling life on the weekends. And the message seemed to be a lot of her bio, and then she really hammered income inequality, corruption. She talked about influence peddling in Washington. There was not a lot of Trump talk. Was that what the caucus goers wanted to hear?
Absolutely, and I think this is lost in D.C. and New York and wherever else you can, yell about a green room. Lots of people have green rooms, but those are the problem green rooms,
right,
like the Morning Joe ones.
Yes.
So there's an idea that Democrats want a fighter, and the fact that Michael Avenatti showed up to some Iowa events and had a crowd and said we need to fight, that got some attention. But it just that's not really what people want. They assume they want a Democrat who will defeat Trump, and there is a trauma from 2016 that I think in some ways is useful, some ways is probably paralyzing. That if you are in a fight with a guy every day, it's going to backfire. And frankly, I one of the pieces I wrote, I quoted something you'd said. So
I noticed that.
Okay, good. We'll talk about it. So, in 2016, Democrats had a very different theory. And frankly, at the time, there were a lot of Republicans who were embarrassed by Trump who have now gone like the Lindsey Graham re-education treatment and are praising him for everything. But it was not crazy to think that pulling Trump out and exposing him and calling him racist, yada yada, that was getting him, that was baiting him, that was getting him off message. That was Warren's role in 2016. I mean, she was tweeting, giving speeches, making fun of him. I remember kind of super PAC videos that were like cartoons that showed Trump literally like shrinking as she talked about him. I quoted you at the time, said that was a good role for her. And frankly, I think in some ways it was. That is not how people think right now. That is not how she thinks.
Yeah.
And a question that was kind of hard to untangle right now, I think it will be untangled, is whether she is in a worse position to criticize Trump than other people is because she does not want to do that. She does not want every time she goes out, because this is her life for a while, every time she goes out, she gives a policy speech, she talks about corruption, and people are like, and then Trump will tweet, crazy Pocahontas is at it again, and she gets asked 50 questions about Pocahontas, yada, yada. She literally only mentioned his name when a voter who, in the tone of the question, wanted her to win, just was worried about her and Trump baiting, said, why'd you take the DNA test?
Yes.
And she said, I can't control when Trump says racial slurs. And in 2016, she tried to control that. I mean, that was when she was speaking. Was Trump would say something and she'd tweet at him and we'd write about it. They have a very different theory now, which I think comports with what Iowa Democrats, and we'll see about other Democrats, what they want, which is, okay, we want somebody who is going to answer that voter who took a chance on Trump and is being driven crazy by how bad he is at this job. And they do not want to hear that Trump sucks. That is taken for granted. It's something that mirrors what people ran on in 2018 when she didn't do a ton of travel for Democrats in that cycle. Did a little bit. She did help a lot of campaigns, and she stayed very close in touch with campaigns. And I think heard that message, that people were not winning by saying, you believe this crazy thing? Do you see that SNL clip? It was, hey, this guy said he was going to fix things. He didn't. Enough about that joke. A jokester. Here's what, I'm going to get in there and expand healthcare. That was her message. Yeah.
I watched that question, that Q&A about the DNA test, and it was a vintage Iowa caucus goer question, because it was sort of a punditry question, like, why would you give Trump more fodder to attack you? Like, a lot of the questions she got were political, and she kept saying, I've been in politics my whole life. I'm a policy person, so let me answer that way. It's incredibly disciplined and impressive. And the other thing I'm hearing from activists and friends who are, getting recruited for jobs, frankly, is that she is like calling people, emailing, lots of personal touches. Like, really, I think an impressive campaign so far.
She's very good on those metrics, and also just the way she presents herself. So I've seen her in Massachusetts a few times at town halls. I've seen her at big progressive events, right? But I've seen her at town halls where she gets a couple of annoyed questions from people. And the thing I've always said about her, and since she's been in politics, is like she did not full of it. She really did not ever think she was going to run for office. Like, had they just made her chair of the CFPB, she would have been chair of the CFPB. That's it. So she was a communicator and an expert who would have to synthesize ideas for people, but not in a way that would say, and then vote for me. Yeah. And she did that for decades, and then she's been a politician for 7 years.
Yep.
So the skill set there's no way to do that without taking decades getting good at something. She has the skill set of talking about policy in a way that does not sound like a bunch of advisors came up with it, and she sometimes kind of sets it up. I remember one question she got, which again was nobody's headline, was, I just want to thank you for your work on the 2018 bankruptcy bill. And she says, we're going to nerd out now. Great. I mean, that's the way she talks.
Yeah,
which
she
is
loves it.
Not used to. And everyone else who's a good communicator in politics comes out. Voters really want authenticity. We always say they do, but more than ever, they think just Trump's going to puncture your armor if it looks like you're a stuffed shirt politician. Yep. And that was not how she came across. I mean, not everyone who was at these events came away saying I'm all in for her, but you did hear that. I mean, so I was standing. I mentioned the overflows and the big crowds. Mm-hmm. I was standing at one overflow in Des Moines, and like right next to people who were having the kind of punditry conversation we were mentioning, and just these nice women who were like, "Oh, in the polls, Biden's doing really good. She's only at 8%." Like they were already communicating about the polling, yep. But then afterwards, she gets done. She's like, "Oh, she just seems so real, And so like Biden also has this, not to get into like I want to go can if I can, but that was somebody who was not super sold on anybody, but knew where the Biden was ahead and. Then her first impression was, that's a normal person running for president who knows stuff. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing that impressed me with her was the way she wove her bio into her vision for the country, which brings up something interesting you wrote about today, which is the political conventional wisdom is that Senator Warren and Bernie Sanders occupy the same political space. But you wrote that Senator Warren, quote, is not Bernie Sanders. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, and actually, I noticed that was the headline of one of the opposition research Republican groups blasted out to reporters, like, devastating gaffe by Warren, she's not Bernie. No, but so Bernie just has a theory of politics that is you have ideas, you build a mass movement, you spread the ideas through giant rallies, and personal lifestyle behavior, you are not important. The message is important. So he does not talk about himself. His office opening, celebration of his office for him being sworn in last week, and Linda Sarsour, who's a Women's March organizer, remember her telling him, "Bernie, you're so humble and it pisses me off." he just doesn't talk about himself.
Yeah.
He just shows up and he's like, the rhythm of Bernie's speech is policy idea, applause. Policy idea, applause. Why don't we have this policy? Applause. Whereas Warren gets up and just says, "Great to be here. I want to tell you who I am." Mm-hmm. And she spends about 4 minutes on her biography, which is one of the things, if you're a reporter, you assume everybody knows it. And they really don't.
No, they really
you look
don't.
around the crowd, and she mentioned she's from Oklahoma, and you see some people go like, "Oh," like nudging each other, like, mm-hmm. I didn't know that. And mentions that she just grew up. She used to say the ragged edge of the middle class. She doesn't say that anymore, but just tells the story of her family, because of medical bills, nearly losing their house and her mother having to go to work. And from that says, and that informs everything. So that informs everything I do. Every time I'm thinking about this, I think of my mother pacing around her house saying, we're not going to lose this house, and putting on her dress and going to get a job at Sears. And back then you could, with a minimum wage job, pay for a family like mine, and now you can't, and that's why I'm in this. And that's the message. And frankly, not to dump on Hillary Clinton, but what I came away with some savvy voters were saying, boy, Hillary never could explain why she was doing this, and Warren explained it. And I thought, cartoon light bulb appeared above my head. That was the problem that people kept citing for Hillary. Another point I'd make is that she also, in her bio, just in talking about her work as a senator, it's a combination of, here's a bunch of stuff I beat the banks on, mainly the CFPB, but also Wells Fargo, Equifax. I mean, she just goes after the banks, but not Republicans. And when she talks about Republicans, she talks about individuals that she has dealt with and gotten things passed with. Mm-hmm. So it is a message that I think resembles some that have worked before, which is there are enemies that I've identified. They're not your neighbors. They're not Republicans. There are these people who, if left unchecked, are going to screw us all over, which is not the same as Trump sucks.
Yeah. I was impressed. It was a tight 15-minute, 20-minute stump speech that I thought was really compelling. Another thing that's been impressive is that she locked down a bunch of talented staff, including a woman named Emily Parcell, who was my colleague for a year when she was Obama's Iowa political director in 2008, and is like the most competent person I've ever worked with. And when I saw Emily get hired, because I didn't think Emily was going to do another campaign, I was like, oh shit, that is an impressive team. And for the first time, it really made me think that there is a cost to those waiting to make a decision. Like, are you hearing any more sense of urgency from the Bernie, Kamala, Beto, Biden camps?
It's a good question. So Bernie's unique because he does have a team that's ready to go if he blows the whistle again. Not exactly the same as last time, but he'd be the only guy running who, has a modern campaign team. And Biden last did this in 2008, right? I think it has shaken some of the other people's schedules. I don't want to. I'm going to try to break the news when I can about when people are actually running. But it was the first really smart move because I think not only in terms of hiring staff did Warren get an advantage, but there are certain narratives that you could see at these events already sunk in with people. Like they were really irritated with how she was already being compared to other women who'd lost stuff, and she was being called unlikable. And I think had Kamala gotten in or Gillibrand gotten in on December 31st, they would have gotten some of the same coverage. Not identical, but there would have been, anonymous Republicans telling Politico or Axios or the Post, oh, she's just like Hillary. And we would have had the same likable discussion when we were about the Post. I think that helps, and that's kind of an intangible thing that you can't replace with another good staffer. But, no, it was very revealing to people. I mean, the very smart, very serious take for the last 2 months was, Warren missed her moment. Warren's had a bad rollout, et cetera, et cetera. But that was not the impression that talented staff came away with, and I think that has changed the way other people are thinking. I mean, there really was a can Warren even run idea
totally.
Circulating a few weeks ago, and it is now, how can we scramble to get staff before she does, which is night and day.
Yeah, anyone taking her for granted should watch some of those events from the weekend because they were good. Last question for you. It has now been 3 days since Congresswoman Rasheda Talib said of Trump, we need to impeach the motherfucker. I just want to know, how are you doing? I know that people in D.C. rarely diverge from the King's English, and it's been a tough time for a lot of folks in the Beltway, and I just want to make sure you're okay.
I'm fine. Journalists, it's very well known that we just break into spontaneous tears whenever someone uses a curse word.
It's awful.
We have to go home for the day. We're very well. What I try to do is I go and say a couple of rosaries just to purify myself. No, the conversation was idiotic.
So
I'll
stupid.
use that word. The dynamics that are more interesting is that it is true that Democrats do not want to talk about impeachment all the time, and it's mostly a media thing. They just hate being asked about that instead of literally anything else they're doing. But the premise that they hated her choice of words, actually, there's like 2 or 3 Democrats, like Joe Manchin, who I will point out said he'd beat the hell out of anybody who tried to burn a flag. A few Democrats who said you like the choice of word. The rest were in similar to Nancy Pelosi saying, that's a generational thing. I wouldn't have said that word, but whatever. And because they know that people in politics talk like this, it's just absurd. It's almost like if somebody said this at like a locker room. We were like, whoa, I can't believe people talk like that. No, we know that. They were a little bit annoyed about impeachment, and frankly, the thing that is too thorny to get into is that Talib has already attracted the ire of a lot of people because she's Palestinian American who believes in a 2-state solution and is at least against banning BDS or punishing boycotts of Israel, is in some I don't want to speak for her, has moved a little bit forward towards boycott, divestment, sanctions of Israel. And okay, that, more than a curse word, that is not something Democrats want to talk about everywhere. But what I found is that, just as Louis Gohmert can exist, and like Charlie Baker doesn't have to get asked about him all the time, she will exist. She is trying to shift the window of debate for her beliefs, and that's okay. And reporters who are grown-ups and know how to curse should not pretend that we are blown back when somebody uses the F word.
Yeah, I mean, look, Brad Sherman, a congressman, plans to reintroduce actual articles of impeachment. I believe he introduced them in 2017 with a couple others. So I'm not sure why we're so worked up about it. Beto O'Rourke talked about impeachment during his Senate campaign. But what I like about your reporting is you wrote up about how stupid this is, basically. But it did launch a million pearl-clutching takes where we act like civility is now dead. It's like, I just wonder, how does the media establishment sort of go forward with that kind of nonsense in the era of Trump? Like, don't people see how stupid it is?
In defense of people, like, if you polygraph people, I think there are some who resented that they had to chase around Talib. but the desk needed it. Not to get too in the weeds.
So the editor said, "You gotta write this."
Like, we need new footage of people responding to this woman. They're like, "Do we?" But in their defense, some of these questions, like, Kevin McCarthy comes out on the fainting couch, brings his own fainting couch, which is actually very hard to get up the stairs in the Capitol.
Yeah. He's lugging around all those Skittles
about
too.
How offended they are, and the first question is, hey, Minority Leader, the president called a woman a horse face. Did you guys not complain about that?
Yeah.
And he kind of hems and haws. So, as long as look, the time to say that this rhetoric is unacceptable in politics was November 2016, and had Trump lost and a congresswoman said this, I think there'd be a different conversation. But it is just it beggars reason to get into this fight while Trump is president, and the questions of two Republicans have taken that tone. I thought it was there is such a thing as real outrage. It doesn't happen very often. Most of what we end up covering in politics is totally fake outrage meant to get, frankly, people like me, but hopefully I'm not dumb enough to fall for it, people like me to write about it.
Yeah, it's hard to spot real outrage in the wild these days. Last question. What is prog rock, and why should all the kids listening like it?
That's right. So in addition to everything I was just talking about, I've written a lot about music. I wrote a book, came out in 2017 called The Show That Never Ends, about progressive rock, and it is a history of this cul-de-sac rock went down, where in the late 60s, and then there were a couple other movements that sparked afterward you read about, kind of acid rock and mod evolved into extremely ornate, orchestral, multi-part song suites that incorporated either classical forms or Asian instrumentation or electronics, just a very high-minded evolution of rock that was seen to be the future for like 5 years, which is actually a pretty long time when you think of how fast trends burn out, and then was totally discarded by 1977. So that's what it's about. People should buy it.
Buy it.
The newsletter is free. The book is not free, but you're gonna like. If you're like me and I just lost a pair of $100 headphones yesterday, what's $18? You can spend it. Who cares?
That's right. AirPods are the easiest things to lose in history. Subscribe to the trailer, buy the book, pay for the Washington Post. It's incredible journalism. Dave Weigel, thank you for joining us. People need to pay for his trips to Iowa so he can keep telling us what the hell's happening there.
And if you buy the book on Amazon, you basically have. So.
Oh, cool. Perfect.
Yeah.
All right, Dave. Thank you so much, man.
All right.
Have a good one.
Thank you.